It gives me huge pleasure to introduce the guest speaker at this year's AGM. We were absolutely delighted that Jim Al-Khalili accepted the invitation of the board last year to succeed Polly Toynbee as president of the British Humanist Association. We're absolutely certain that he is the first president of the British Humanist Association whose great-great-great-grandfather was an Ayatollah. It's almost completely... Polly wasn't sure, but she was pretty certain of that. You can never tell, of course. I witnessed firsthand how popular and how widespread in his appeal Jim is. I'll explain. We work very hard in the BH office, as you know, so every Tuesday morning we've got our heads down on our computers working away. So I didn't realise quite well, I didn't understand quite why, as we went around the BHA conference in Leeds, everyone was coming up to Jim saying, "Oh yes, I'm looking forward to listening to you again next Tuesday morning." Everyone was saying, "See, next Tuesday morning, next Tuesday morning." And I thought he gets about quite a bit, Jim Al-Khalili. But in fact, everyone tunes into him on Tuesday mornings to listen to... yes, there you go. He's very eager. Everyone tunes into him on Tuesday morning to listen to the Life Scientific. And as we were observing only this morning, this success has been of such tremendous proportions that the Sunday Times felt compelled to reveal the conspiracy, the BHA takeover of Radio 4 just a couple of weeks ago, spearheaded by Jim. Well, we're quite happy for him to take over the entire BBC on our behalf. But today he'll limit himself more to introducing himself and his presidency to you, and I hope you'll give him a very, very warm welcome as he does so.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for those kind words. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Yes, it is a real pleasure, my first AGM. It's a shame it's too warm, because I did bring my jacket, which is rather smart linen suit, with a very nice BHA lapel badge, which I wanted to show off, but I felt it's too warm. I suppose I could have worn it on my shirt, never mind. It is a real pleasure and an honour to be speaking to you today. I am very proud to be taking over as president of BHA, and indeed at a time when it seems like I am fronting so much good work that's really now bearing fruit. I should also say from the start, I am very grateful to Andrew and his team for all the advice, encouragement and patience they've shown me in helping me settle into my new role. So for those of you who I know I've met a number of you at the Leeds conference a few weeks ago, but for those of you who don't know me or much about me or my background, allow me to indulge in telling you a little about me and about what I do and what I believe. So first and foremost, as you may have gathered, I am a scientist. So I view the world as a scientist views the world. I'm curious about the universe and our place in it, sometimes to the point of obsession. That's what defines me as a scientist. I have an unshakable, rational conviction that our universe is understandable, that mysteries are only mysteries because we have yet to figure out the almost always logical answers. For me, there's simply no room, no need for a supernatural divine being to fill in the gaps in our understanding. We'll get there. We'll fill in those gaps with objective scientific truths. Answers that aren't subjective because of cultural or historical whims or personal biases, but because of empirically testable and reproducible truths. We may not get the full picture. We may never get the full picture, but science allows us to get ever closer. Outside of science, and like, I guess, the vast majority of people, I subconsciously live by the adage that one should treat others the way one would wish to be treated in their position. So this means I value human traits and attributes like empathy, tolerance, and kindness. And it's really only in recent years that I came to appreciate that these beliefs actually define me as a humanist. In many ways, despite my illustrious background and my great-great-great-grandfather, mine is an uncomplicated and undemanding lifestyle. The people I mix with, my friends, my colleagues, in my liberal, generally well-educated and enlightened little world, it's easy to be complacent, even lazy in this attitude-affirming bubble, this humanist bubble. I'm surrounded by like-minded people. On the whole, those who follow me on Twitter do so because they hold similar views to me, and that's presumably why they follow me, and likewise I follow similar people that I tend to agree with. This reinforces the illusion that the rest of the world agrees with me, and it's very comforting. So I do find it scary sometimes when I look outside that bubble and see attitudes, beliefs, bigotry, violence, medieval irrational acts that are committed in the name of religion. In general, I'm tolerant of people with religious faith. Somewhat in contrast with many of my fellow atheists and humanist friends, I believe there is room for people with religious faith in the world. After all, many of my family and friends, Christians, Muslims, Jews, have deeply held beliefs. Do I think the world would be a better place without religion at all? Well, in a utopian sense, I guess, yes, it would be nice to live in a world in which no one feels the need to believe in a supernatural, omnipotent creator to make sense of the world and their place in it. But this isn't going to happen anytime soon. And a reasonable argument can be made in any case that the world would be a pretty boring place if we all thought and believed the same things. Of course, we look around the world today at the many injustices carried out in the name of religion, the violent sectarian violence in Iraq, now in Syria, Pakistan, and elsewhere, at the outdated views of the many Christian churches on women and contraception or gay rights, or even trivial things like the unfairness of a society that allows all beliefs to be represented at National Remembrance Day ceremonies, apart from those who don't subscribe to a recognised religion. I was very pleased, in fact, Andrew mentioned the Sunday Times article a couple of Sundays ago about the humanist conspiracy to be along there, that as scientists, as me and Brian Cox and Adam Rutherford and Alice Roberts and Robin Ince. So, I mean, first of all, I thought it was a very strange article. I wasn't quite sure if it was, if it was meant to be amusing or whether this guy was really scared. But then I thought, yeah, good, we're winning. Next stop, thought for the day. But to wish for a world where some people can't have their own private belief in a particular worldview, whether it's a monotheistic God or UFOs or magic, would be a bland world to live in. What's objectionable, of course, is when these beliefs seep into our shared public sphere to have decisive influence on policy and legislation in a way that affects the rest of us. My tolerant stance is also born out of my respect for the many people who have religious faith and who don't feel inclined to impose their beliefs on others or to be given special privileges in law. These are decent people who do not deserve the derision we might pour on them for holding silly views. We must acknowledge that for many people, faith provides comfort, social cohesion, a sense of belonging, and hope. Whether we like it or not, that, I think, is true. I don't need it, but it would be both arrogant and incredibly naive of me to think that everyone is going to think the way I do, if only they would hear me out. One of the most important traits I believe a humanist can have is empathy. Don't get me wrong, I am utterly secure in my atheism. As someone once said, I'm as agnostic about the existence of God as I am about the existence of Father Christmas, and I'm pretty sure the latter is made up. I'm also completely and unreservedly intolerant of religious intolerance. So don't mistake me for some kind of cultural relativist. On the other hand, I grew up in Iraq to a Shia Muslim father and a born-again evangelical Christian mother. Interesting mix. They're still married after 52, 53 years. So if they can get on, I think... And it's because of my background and my familiarity with Muslim culture and ways of thinking that I have such a problem with so many attitudes in the Muslim world today. The Iraq in which I spent my childhood was very different to the one we see on the news today. It was before Saddam, it was before sectarian hatred had erupted. Growing up in school in my class, I didn't know which kid was the Shia and which kid was the Sunni Muslim. We knew the two Christian lads in my class because they were excused from RE lessons and they could go and kick a football about. But no one knew who was the Shia, who was the Muslim. I mean, that's very, very different today. In fact, having studied the subject, I think the Iraq of 1,000 years ago, under the Abbasid dynasty, was probably more enlightened and inclusive than the Iraq of today. The Iraq of the 60s and 70s, in which I grew up, sadly no longer exists. But growing up in a Muslim culture does give one insights, and so you see I haven't always inhabited this comfortable liberal bubble. It's also why I'm so pleased to see that Alam Shahar has been elected as one of the new trustees. If you haven't read his book, The Young Atheist Handbook, you really should do, and I'm sure it's on sale there. What did we agree on my commission for plugging it? I tend to often, I want to though return to a little bit, since I am a scientist, I want to say a little bit more about science. I tend to often argue against creationism, not from a biologist's stance of Darwinian evolution being correct, but from a geological, astronomical, even nuclear physics angle. For me, these, if anything, are more powerful arguments than natural selection about the age of the universe, because they're easier to defend. There's carbon dating, the half-life of uranium, elemental abundances in the universe, the speed of light and the time it takes light to reach us from distant galaxies, the rate of expansion of the universe, the microwave background radiation. I could go on and on and on. There's so much evidence. If all this was just put there by God to test our faith, then we cease to live in a rational world, and nothing we see needs to make sense. Because if we find something we can't explain or can't quite fit into our worldview, it becomes magic, just down to the divine whim of a creator. How do we draw the line between something we can explain about our universe and something we can't and therefore just have to accept? It's therefore very gratifying to see that the Teach Evolution, Not Creationism campaign has led to the inclusion of evolution in primary school curricula, although not until year 6, as opposed to year 4 as originally planned. It's also encouraging to see that there is now a requirement for all free schools to teach evolution and also not be able to teach pseudoscience. Although why this has had to be something we need to push in the 21st century and in Britain is itself quite sad. Of course, and we are still seeing the continuing increase in the number of faith schools. There's much more work to be done. So are science and religion compatible? Is every scientist an atheist? It depends, of course, how you define each and who you are. Can a biologist be a creationist? Of course not. The central idea in biology is Darwinian natural selection. You can't simultaneously acknowledge that evolution is correct and believe the world was created in 4004 BC at 11 o'clock on a Thursday morning. But if you ask me, can a string theorist be a creationist, then in principle, I would say yes. I'd be disappointed that someone as bright enough to understand string theory also held a creationist view. But on a practical level, unless string theory makes predictions about the age of the universe, which it doesn't, then the two need not conflict. Of course, in creationism, I've chosen a rather extreme example of irrational belief, and I guess that isn't very fair. One of the most respected astrophysicists in the world today is Dame Jocelyn Bell Burnell, a physicist and a long-term colleague of mine. a woman who in the mid-1960s discovered objects called pulsars, tiny, dense stars. They're the collapsed cores of supernovae explosions. She discovered them while she was still a PhD student. She should have won the Nobel Prize, but it was passed her by for very awful reasons that her supervisor and her head of department walked off with it, deeming her unworthy because she was only a student, and presumably because she was a woman. Hers is not the only story. She's also a Quaker. Has her faith made her any less of a scientist? I don't believe it has. And of course, the engineer or the mathematician or the inorganic chemist or the laser physicist can also get on with their scientific work, even if it's fundamental research about the nature of the universe, and not have it be compromised by the fact that they pray or go to a synagogue or a church or refuse to eat beef or pork. They can choose to live their lives in a certain way and still do their science well. Of course, ultimately, a belief in scientific truth is to subscribe to the worldview that the universe is comprehensible through deep underlying laws of nature, often mathematical laws, and principles that follow from logic, which are comprehensible by the human mind. Cause and effect, logic, rational explanation, causality. If I'm pushed to ask then whether all this sits comfortably with a belief that there is a supernatural being that requires no explanation, then of course I would say no. The issue here, however, is not that I would wish to banish such double thinking from everyone, but rather that, and many intelligent people of faith see this just as clearly as I do, where an issue of faith butts up to and conflicts with science, and here I mean scientific truth, then I'm sorry, but religion has to give way. After all, this has been happening constantly for the past half a millennium, even if the Catholic Church was rather slow in accepting heliocentrism and the work of Galileo and Copernicus. As we learn more about our universe and the workings of nature, so those who follow the teachings of a religion must revise their views, for not to means society will leave them behind. Scientific discoveries are not fashions. They're not just the current way of thinking. They may be wrong, of course. They may almost certainly not be the whole picture. But we arrive at scientific understanding by learning the language of nature, the laws of physics and chemistry, and by examining hypotheses and asking others to test them and to reproduce our empirical results, by constantly subjecting our theories to scrutiny and testing them to destruction. This is all the opposite of blind faith. Not everyone follows a religious faith blindly. To think that is insulting to many people who constantly question their faith. So as an atheist, I find I choose my battles carefully. If you're a creationist or you believe that quantum mechanics and relativity are explained in the Quran, or that astrology or homeopathy or wearing copper bracelets or Reiki healing actually work, or even more damaging, that you should be allowed to discriminate against gay people, against those who don't hold your particular beliefs, exclude children from access to schools because of their parents' belief, or that you should receive public funding to do so, well then, with those battles, bring it on. These are all irrational views, and many are very harmful as well. But if you have a deeply held conviction that there's something out there, some deeper significance, some presence, some force or spiritual meaning to your life that is very important to you, then who the hell am I to try and convince you otherwise, if you don't impose that view on me or others? Okay, enough science. Very excited to be part of the BHA because I do think it reflects the view that I've been expressing, a commitment to promoting non-religious scientific view of the universe, but at the same time a liberal attitude towards private beliefs as long as they're not harming others. This attitude, of course, is reflected in our campaigns against state-funded education. State-funded education would be wrong, because we wouldn't obviously want everyone to be privately educated. That's a rather too broad a statement. State-funded religious schools that discriminate and indoctrinate. in favour instead of an open and inclusive education system that will educate our children together and not segregate society. This year saw the launch of the National Fair Admissions campaign to put an end to religious selection in schools. And we follow the work of people like Richie at the BHA in the hope that it can make real progress in the coming years. I firmly believe that our message is now getting across more clearly than ever before. Just this past year, I wasn't here from the beginning of the AGM, so I'm not sure if this figure was mentioned. I suspect Andrew probably did. But this past year has seen a 55% increase on last year in coverage of our activities in the British print and broadcast media. We also express that attitude in our community service work that never makes the headlines, that goes on every day across the country. The BHA, as I'm sure you all know, conducts hundreds of weddings, 1 in every 75 funerals in England and Wales through our provision of personalised and meaningful non-religious ceremonies. We provide volunteers to prisons, hospitals, provide moral and emotional support to non-religious patients and prisoners. We are the only organisation actively supporting the Paul Lamb, Tony Nicholson legal case seeking the right to die. And again, that's something that I would have hoped that other groups would join us in supporting to allow us to shout even louder. Finally, of course, I don't need to mention, Andrew is still floating on air, I think, from last week's great news about this massive step we've taken closer to legislation of humanist marriages through an amendment to the same-sex marriage bill after 12 years of campaigning on this. All this work touches the lives of a broad cross-section of society that has no religious beliefs but is implicitly humanist. I want to get the message across that we represent the broad cross-section of society in this country. My firm conviction is that actually more than half the country would probably agree with what we stand for. It shouldn't be that humanists are those who have somehow extracted themselves from society's default position of theism in some form. We are the default. At the BHA, we work to increase public awareness of what humanism is, to let the many millions of non-religious people in this country who are humanists without knowing it, let them know that far from being somehow deficient in their values, that they have an outlook on life which is coherent and widely shared, which has inspired some of the world's greatest artists, writers, scientists, philosophers, and social reformers, and which has millennia-long tradition in both the West and the East. The crucial issue for me is that, of course, and many people use this phrase, but that's because it's quite a neat phrase, you don't need God to be good. Having a faith in God is fine if that's something that is important to you. And if you truly believe this as an ontological proof, then it's rather pointless of me trying to have a theological debate about it. But don't tell me that organised religion is the only means through which one can lead a good life. This attitude that only religious faith can provide a moral compass, that without it society dissolves into some sort of hedonistic, anarchic, amoral, self-gratifying decadence, is not only arrogant rubbish, but groundless intellectual laziness. And it has been proven to be so for many people in this country. We are in a very strong position to be able to change attitudes, to correct unjust and discriminatory laws, and make for a fairer society, living in a secular state where religion doesn't give one group an advantage or special privileges. I want to work to do that. And while doing it, if I want to convince wider society, including religious believers, that being a humanist and not having religious belief doesn't make you an extremist, then that's a bonus. It doesn't make you a fanatic or radical. Indeed, we can often be more effective in getting our message across with possibly a softer approach. The new atheists have laid the foundations. Maybe it's now time for the new atheists. The BHA currently has a membership and support basis of around 40,000. Why is that? Why is it just 40,000? Why isn't it 20 million? That's how many non-religious people, also according to my broad definition of humanism there are in Britain, according to surveys of public beliefs. Somewhat paradoxically then, I look forward to the day when there is no need for the British Humanist Association, because most of us will be humanists. Andrew Copson and his team will be out of a job, but the world will be a better place. Thank you very much.
We're so ahead of time that the wine isn't even uncorked, and the oranges aren't even juiced, if that's your thing. So we've got time for 15 minutes of questions. Who would like to ask a question of our new president?
When Polly Toynbee was president, I remember hearing her on Radio 4 in a capacity of talking about things that were ethical. And she was never introduced as president of the BHA or ex-president of the BHA. And it always seems a bit strange. I mean, obviously, when you're doing your normal radio programmes, you wouldn't introduce yourself as president because it's not relevant. But it seems odd in the situation where it would be really relevant. It was never mentioned. I wonder how you felt about that and how you might use your position to make it more high-profile.
Yes, I think you're right. I mean, people like Polly Toynbee and I guess myself, you know, we have many hats, and so if you're presenting a science program, you're introduced as a professor of physics. If you do, you know, it depends on the context. But absolutely, I think it will be tremendously sad and a trick missed if there was some relevance about, you know, getting that message across that I was president of the BHA and I wasn't introduced as such. So I'd hope that we'd be conscious. I mean, Andrew can't always be there, making sure that, you know, whatever media outlet or appearance I make, that's somehow that message has got across. But I am certainly aware of it, and I will certainly endeavour to make sure that if the occasion arises, that they know my role.
Claire Rayner, they couldn't shut her up. Whenever she went on anything, she'd go, and don't forget, I'm a member of the British Humanist Association. Be like her. Yes.
I very much welcome what you were saying about tolerance of people with a religious faith if that's important to them. You tended to put it in terms of this sort of public-private distinction. As long as people's religious faith is just part of their private life, that's okay. But of course, a lot of religious people would say, well, the whole point about my faith is that it drives me to manifest it in the world in all sorts of ways. So what about, I mean, what's your attitude towards religious people who engage in public life, for example, by saying, well, if I believe in love for one's neighbour, then I believe in campaigning against global poverty. What about the religious people who would support us on a lot of the campaigns that we run? How would you see our relationship to that rather more complex picture of the engagement of religious people in public life?
I don't see any issue or problem with religious organisations, churches, who have campaigns or activities which, you know, whether it's charitable organisations raising money or carrying out activities that are, on the whole, seen as a good thing for society. I mean, there are all sorts of people with all sorts of different views, and that's what makes for a rich society. To say that I don't think you're right, what you believe in ultimately is superstitious nonsense, therefore you're not allowed to go and do good, I think that's a very narrow and self-defeating attitude. But that's my own personal view, and I know, I mean, one of the nice things about humanism in general, and certainly the BHA, is that we don't all share the same view. We are not some cult who follow a particular party line. I remember when I was a student, and I was so staunch a Labour supporter, minus strike, and I'd be sitting watching Question Time, taking notes, and if there was a viewpoint I wasn't sure where I stood on, so where do Labour stand on that? Right, that's my view. I didn't try and give it any thought. So, yeah, I think there's a broad range of views. Not everyone will agree with me, but as far as I'm concerned, if religious organisations are trying to raise money to fight poverty or whatever it is, and even, I mean, that's a very clear example. Why on earth would you want to stop that? But I don't think that there's an issue. But maybe, Andrew, did you have anything to add to that? Or?
No, I won't. I've finished speaking. Far be it from me. Yeah. I think the important point, sorry. Just very briefly. Is that you took Jim to be making a private-public distinction. I heard more that it was a distinction between people and organisations who have their views and want to contribute those and speak their view, and then organisations who want to have their view carry the day and be privileged in doing so. You know, it's the difference between, in many ways, it's the difference between running a private religious charity and then running a religious school that's 100% state-funded and enforcing your criteria as a result. But I mean, this is a conversation that you and I and everyone will have for many, many years, I'm sure. But that's what I heard. That's what I heard Jim saying. Yes.
Thank you, Jim. You touched a moment ago on your youthful political views. Sorry. Here.
Oh, why did you stand up? Because it is slightly easier, actually.
You touched a moment ago on your youthful political views, and I have to declare an interest here. My name's Toby Keynes. I'm chairman of Humanist and Secularist Liberal Democrats. I just wondered whether you have engaged or see yourself engaging with politicians in your role as president, and if you have had any particularly interesting engagements with particular politicians so far.
Well, so far, most of my connections with politicians through the campaigns has been indirect, through having my name added to the bottom of letters when we've been lobbying government and parliament on the number of campaigns that we're carrying out. Every now and again, I will meet a politician wearing various hats, but I mean, at the moment, so far, it's tended to be in my role as a scientist. So, you know, I've done events and I've had meetings with people like David Willits, the science minister, and through my work with the BBC. And so I'm really now at the point where, because I have certain responsibilities, I don't clearly show any political allegiance. I try not to at all. There are a number of politicians. I mean, you know, I would never have thought I would be cavorting with a Conservative minister and actually finding him a nice bloke. But David Willits ain't no gove.
I think you're speaking, aren't you, at the next meeting of the All-Party Parliamentary Humanist Group, actually, so you'll meet a lot more politicians.
Yes,
yeah.
Jim, what does your programme look like as President of the BHA? What events and activities are you in which are you going to be representing the BHA? Because I think I'd like to have an idea, and I suspect many other people would like to as well.
Yes, well, I mean, when I first took on the role, and I think, I mean, Andrew and our previous chief executives will always have this problem when you ask someone to take on the presidency. They say, well, what's my commitment going to be like? What's the minimum I can get away with? And so they give you the minimum requirement. But of course, as you settle into the role, you realise, you can't really do the role justice unless you get much more involved. So there are the fixed events that when I first took on the role that I had to put down in the calendar, various lectures. There's the AGM, there's the annual conference, but I've also given a talk at the Oxford Union. I'm going to give a talk in Cambridge Union. I think that in the office they will have the diary of events when I'm going to be wheeled out in public, which I'm sure they're happy to share with people if they want to know. If you haven't heard enough of me, I won't. Same old rubbish said again. I'll try and tweak it.
The World Congress.
The World Congress, of course. That's what I'm really excited about. That I've hit the presidency at a period when the World Humanist Congress comes to the UK, and I'm really looking forward to doing that.
First, I just want to say how much I welcome what you've said about the new atheism and distinguishing between belief and imposition of privilege. I think that's a very important distinction. I completely support it. Just wonder, you said at the end that, in the perfect world, that the office was closed and everything. And there is a bit of a dichotomy between humanism as seen as a sort of a campaigning organisation being anti-privilege and humanism as a positive world view. And given we're in a sort of plural society with some disturbing growing divisions, can you say anything about creating a positive image for humanism as well as a levelling playing field image?
Well, I think it's, the more the word gets out there, I think it's, I don't know whether it's just me, but I get the impression that the wider public is becoming very quickly much more accepting of humanism and atheism in a way that just wasn't the case a decade or two ago. I mean, a lot of it is thanks to people like Richard Dawkins. But yes, the BHA has a role to play, which is about pushing forward specific projects and campaigns and seeing where there is unfairness in legislation and law, and to change that. And that, as you say, that's very different from a group of people under some umbrella who all think in similar sorts of ways. But I think the more people, and I think one of what we want to do is involves many more of our distinguished supporters to get the message across about humanism as a way of thinking and living life, because some of our distinguished supporters, have very wide reach, are very well known in society, are household names, and so I think these are two strands. There's the team who work full time at plugging away and chipping away at some of these outmoded laws, and then there's this trying to get the message across about humanism being a good way of living your life, which maybe hasn't happened. We've not been able to do it in the past, and trying to sort of gee up some of our distinguished supporters, who no doubt will be very happy to help, I think is a very good way forward.
Okay, last two questions then. So, yes, and then yes, and you're the last one.
Talking of positivism, why do you call yourself an atheist? Surely it's a negative word, meaningless. As Jonathan Miller puts it, how can I not believe in something that doesn't exist? Let's talk about humanism and be positive.
But that's a good point. I would like actually to find another. It would be nice if we could find another name to replace atheism, because it assumes you'll have to be theist to opt out. You have a name for it?
Yeah, I was thinking of post-theism.
Post-theism, okay. I think if we say it enough times, it'll start to roll off the tongue.
That goes down very well in the pub, I'm sure.
You were talking about, working with people of religion when you have a common agenda, and I strongly agree with that and think how important it is. However, I think there is another side to that question that we need to be aware of, and I have been asked to talk about praying for the poor, praying spelled with an A, or praying spelled with an E, on the vulnerable. And I think if you look at the work of some of the religious development organisations, also if you look at some of the religious groups that now have government contracts for providing social services in this country, although in theory we may both agree that people who don't have enough to eat need feeding, there can be hidden agendas sometimes, and the ones who believe in the faith can get priority, there can be some proselytising going on. So I think even in cases where we seem to have the same aim, I'm not saying we should never work together, far from it, and I've said earlier how important I think the Accord alliance is, but I think we just need to look carefully that there aren't other agendas going on that actually undermine us.
I completely agree with you.
Oh, excellent. Well, that's a brilliant. I see everyone's got a thirst on. Yeah. Well, I think you'll all agree with me that we're incredibly lucky to have such a warm, intelligent and open new president. I think he's going to do us proud in the next couple of years. I've just started reading his book on the golden age of Arabic science, which is fascinating. It was a golden age for science, the Middle Ages in the Arab world. It was also a golden age of a form of poetry called the wine song. Did you know that? Yes, it was. There's a whole epic of literature, including the words, when I die, bury me below the vine, so that its roots can satisfy the thirst of my bones. While you're still alive, there's an easier way to enjoy the fruit of the vine. Very smooth, wasn't it? Very. That was a segue at a quantum level. A round of applause for our favourite quantum mechanic.
Thank you very much. Thank you.